Okay, so picture this. You're listening in on Netflix's Q3 2025 earnings call. Things are looking pretty solid. But then, wham, you notice this one line item. It's mysterious, it's very expensive, and it all comes down to a complicated tax issue in Brazil. We're going to get to the bottom of it. So, what exactly was this Brazilian tax matter that put such a dent in their earnings? We are going to unpack this whole financial puzzle. And the best part? We'll be using the CFO's own words from the call to break down this super complex issue into a story that actually makes sense. All right, let's start with the good news. On the surface, things look great. Netflix's revenue, it was right on track, exactly what everyone expected. But, and this is a big but, underneath that top-line number, there was this one single issue that kept them from knocking their operating income forecast out of the park. And that culprit was a pretty nasty surprise. A tax expense covering multiple years, all crammed into a single quarter. So, what exactly is this charge that just kind of popped up on the books out of nowhere? Let's dig in and get specific.
Okay, we're about to decode what's known as the side tax. Now, the official name is a real mouthful, trust me. But the idea behind it? It's absolutely crucial if you want to understand how this whole thing impacted their business.
So here's the deal. CIDE stands for Contribution for Intervention in Economic Domain. Yeah, I know, but here's what you really need to know. It's a 10% gross tax on certain payments that Brazilian companies make to companies outside of Brazil. Think of it less like a tax on profit and more like a toll you have to pay for money leaving the country for certain services. And what's interesting is this isn't just a Netflix thing. It affects a lot of industries.
And this is where the CFO, Spence Newman, really clarifies things. He said, and I quote, "It's not an income tax, it's a cost of doing business in Brazil." Now, that might sound like just words, but it's actually super important. By framing it that way, he's telling investors exactly why it hit their operating margin directly. It wasn't some other tax item. It was a fundamental cost, right up there with content and marketing. That's a huge distinction.
Okay, so that leads to the big question, right? If this tax has been around for a while, why is it just now all of a sudden hitting their books? Well, the answer? It's like something out of a legal drama. A real tale of two rulings. Check out this timeline. It's a real roller coaster. Back in 2022, things were looking good for Netflix. A lower court actually ruled in their favor, saying they weren't subject to the tax. So in 2023, they just flag it as a potential risk in their SEC filings, just in case. Then, bam, August 2025, the Brazilian Supreme Court rules against a totally unrelated company. But that ruling sets a new, much broader precedent. And because of that, in Q3 2025, Netflix's lawyers said, okay, the game has changed, this loss is now probable. And that's when they had to put it on the books. And that brings us to the size of the charge. Why was it so massive? Well, it wasn't just for 2025. They had to account for the entire period going all the way back to that initial court ruling in 2022. That's 3 years of back taxes hitting them all at once. In fact, if you look at the breakdown, it really tells the story. A whopping 80% of that hit was for the prior years, 2022 through 2024. Only about 20% of it was actually for business done in 2025. It was almost all a catch-up payment. So that's a lot of complexity, I know. Legal rulings, tax codes, but the CFO really wanted to boil it all down for investors. He wanted them to walk away with a crystal clear understanding of the bottom line. So first, let's look at the official story, the headline number. When you include this big tax expense, what does it look like? Well, it looks like Netflix missed its operating income forecast for the quarter. Not great, right? But, and this is the what-if scenario he really wanted everyone to see. If you pull that one-time, multi-year tax charge out of the equation, what happens? They would have actually beaten their forecast. A totally different story. So, the CFO's key takeaways were really simple. First, this CID tax is pretty unique to Brazil. It's not something they're dealing with in their other big markets. And second, and most importantly, this was a one-time hit. The message was clear. Don't let this weird one-off charge fool you. The underlying business performance was actually stronger than the headline numbers made it seem. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? As investors, how many other little hidden risks like this are tucked away in the financial filings of these massive global companies? These complex, country-specific issues just sitting there quietly, waiting for one court ruling to suddenly bring them into the spotlight.